Okay, just do it. Hi. So the purpose of this video is to show you some of the things that I would normally show you in class. You'll be getting the presentation on spinning that will contain all of these things in written form, plus some additional assignments for you. However, I really need to show you some of the things here because the way you responded to my inquiry, as it turns out, some of you had heard of these terms before, whereas some of you haven't. I'm not sure why that is the case. I was pretty sure that the freshman year was taking all the courses together, and at this stage you still don't have any elective courses, but maybe I was wrong. Okay, so the first slide in your presentation is going to discuss the difference between fiber spinning and yarn spinning. We've already talked about fiber spinning in the first semester, and that is actually the extrusion of either a solution or a melt, and which results in the production of man-made fibers. And this term in Croatian is translated as ispredanje, whereas this spinning in our first unit is actually the production of yarn. So the process of how we are going to convert staple fibers, which all natural fibers actually, except for silk, come in the form of staple fibers, but also filaments, into a long continuous thread that we call yarn. Okay, so we're going to take an example of cotton fibers. So these are actually these are viscose fibers. I couldn't find raw cotton fibers anywhere except for in very old-fashioned sanitary pads, but those were not actually, those were linters. As you probably remember, staple fibers, cotton fibers, are somewhere between 1 and 6 centimeters long. But in order to make fabrics, first we need to make a long thread, long continuous thread that is going to be long enough to make something worthwhile out of it. Okay, so the first two slides, after the third and the second and the third slide, are going to contain, say, roughly 10 stages of the yarn production process. So if we're talking about cotton fibers, what comes first, of course, is harvesting, then packing into bales or baling, and these will take place still on the cotton field, right? However, the rest of the processes then will start taking place at a special facility which is designed to make yarn. And you have to try and figure out what we call this. Okay, so I believe this is all very straightforward, clear, and there's nothing that we need to discuss here in particular. So maybe just for blending, if we're going to produce blended yarn, and when you have a combination of several raw materials, the blending is going to take place before the actual spinning. So these first 5 stages are just sort of a preparation before we actually start converting these fibers into something else than a completely disorganized bundle. Okay, so the first process that we need to discuss here is called carding. So this is the Croatian translation, okay? And the product of carding is going to be an organized and aligned bundle of fibers, which is called a sliver or a sliver. Both pronunciations are possible, This is the Croatian translation of it, okay? And what we get here is, obviously, this is just part of a sliver. As you are going to see in the video that I'm going to link, you'll see that as the fibers are fed into the carding machine, and what comes out of the carding machine is already practically a continuous, endless bundle of slivers. Okay, so the carding process is followed usually by combing. However, combing does not necessarily have to follow. The product of combing is called a top. So here we have another homonym, and this is an example of a top. This wasn't supposed to happen. This got split into two. So this is actually the thickness of an average top, and the top that I have here is actually 100% wool. So it's not. I couldn't get one that is made of 100% cotton. So the sliver was made of cotton, and the rest of the products are 100% cotton. But I only had an example of a top made of 100% wool, which is already dyed, as you can see. So, as I said, combing can but does not have to follow. I hope you remember that we discussed the difference between woolen and worsted yarn in the first semester when we talked about wool. And we defined woolen yarn as fuzzy, bulky, soft, and significantly weaker than the worsted yarn. So the terms woolen and worsted, which we translate as grebenana and češnjana pređa, refer only to wool. And if we're going to talk about cotton fibers, we can make a difference between carded and combed yarn. So the result is going to be the same. Carded yarn is usually bulkier, softer, fuzzier, and weaker, whereas combed yarn, so the fibers are very neatly organized, very much aligned, and yeah, if only I knew how to, cut out this section. Combed yarn is going to be much stronger. Okay, and of course, if in the production of yarn we do have a combing process, this is actually going to affect the price of the final product and of the entire process, since it makes it longer, but of course the product is of much higher quality. Okay, so as you've seen, both slivers and tops are still pretty thick, yeah? And the final yarn that we get is usually already very, very thin. We all have examples of yarn in our homes, such as, for example, the sewing thread, which is also actually a type of yarn used for sewing, usually much stronger than the yarn that we are going to use for making fabrics, whether knitted or woven. Okay, so what we do with the slivers or tops is called drawing. Here we have another homonym. We are used to the meaning of drawing, meaning making images with the strokes of a pencil. However, in this case, we are going to translate this as istezanje, okay? And what results out of this process is called roving, or as you can see here, predpređa. So now I'm going to show you what roving looks like. So this is 100% cotton roving. Let me just find the beginning here. Okay. The fibers here are very, very thinned out, very well aligned, and just slightly twisted. So now I'm going to demonstrate how extremely delicate and weak roving is. So by applying minimum force, I can actually break these apart, okay? So, but we need to come to this stage in order to actually reach the final process in which we're finally going to get the yarn, and that is actually twisting. So here we have another example of a homonym, or yet better, maybe just an expansion of a semantic field. But this twisting we are going to refer to as uvijanje, and the product that we get, of course, is yarn. So I'm just going to demonstrate on this piece. As we twist the fibers, the strength is very much increased. The more we twist, the stronger this thing gets. Okay, so as you can see, it's already much thinner and much stronger. So here I would have to apply significant force in order to break these into two. Now I can't even do this without causing wounds or injuries on my fingers. Okay, so in the story of the nymphs of the English language, we've already seen how complex things can get, and it can get even worse, okay? You are all familiar with this phenomenon in the English language, and it's very common. Okay, so we've discussed the nymphs, and here we should discuss some of the homos of the English language besides homonymy. The final stage we have in the production of yarn is going to be number 10, as you're going to see right here and in the presentation. But before that, we should first compare these two things. So, WIND1 and WIND2. So, as it says here, these words are homographs. It means that they are spelled in the same way. However, the pronunciation is going to be different. So the first one is wind, but the second one is wind. Okay, I believe the first one is very straightforward. We're one of the, say, top 100 words we first learn when we start learning English. However, the second one may or may not be familiar to all of you. And in order to make things even more complicated, this one is a noun, this one is a verb, and this verb is irregular. And then we come to this second pair of homographs, okay? So the first one, we're going to pronounce wound, mentioned earlier, an injury. So a synonym to injury. However, the second one is actually pronounced wound. So we are concerned here, we are interested in the second meaning of both this and this. It's the verb wind, and the past and past participle form are pronounced wound. So here we reach the final stage of the yarn production process. As you're going to see in the video, there are several machines working at the same time, and all of it are dealing with, let's say, one particular sliver or top or roving at the time, okay? And as the yarn is finally made, they all wind them onto these that are called cops, okay? So this is our translation of the word. And they're finally wound from this onto these. Okay, so this is the spool that is actually going to be distributed further to either a weaving mill or a knitting mill or wherever it needs to go. Okay, so a cheese here. Here is the translation of the word in the textile jargon. And so we're going to use the word spool to be a generic term for any type of winding of the yarn on the final tube. This one in particular is actually called a cone because of the shape, okay? And cheeses are usually much bigger and they're rounder. They actually look like a wheel of a cheese that you've probably seen either live or somewhere on the screen. Okay. Hopefully this clarifies some of the things. So you'll be required to fill in the gaps in the presentation, and as you do that, this is all going to be followed with a glossary of terms that you'll be required to fill in, and also a set of comprehension check questions. Okay, I'm gonna call it quits for this one. Take care, and I'll see you soon, hopefully. Bye.